Welcome back to Layer Lines Weekly. I'm Alex, here with Jordan, and today we're doing a full company profile. No bird's nest print report, no scandalous overhang video, just one company under the microscope. And here's my one-sentence thesis. Stratasys is the original incumbent of this whole industry, the company that basically invented desktop-adjacent 3D printing as we know it. And right now it is trying to reinvent itself from a prototyping company into an industrial production company before the market moves out from under it.
That's a fair thesis, and I'd flag right at the top that the phrase betting its future is a narrative device. Stratasys has been talking about the shift to production for a long time, so part of what I want to figure out today is whether the pivot is genuinely new or whether it's the same slide deck they've been showing for years with a fresh coat of paint.
Which is exactly the tension. So here's what we'll walk through. Where they came from, and it's a 1989 origin story with a real inventor and a real patent, the products that made them influential, who's steering the ship now, what they're actually good at, where they sit in the market, and then the hard parts, including a deal we've covered on this show 3 times already.
The Markforged deal, yeah, we can't do a Stratasys episode in 2026 without it. But I want to earn our way there, not open with it. Let's start where they started.
Okay, origin story. Stratasys was founded in 1989 by Scott Crump, and I want to note his wife Lisa Crump is a co-founder too, which gets left out of the tidy version. Scott Crump is the guy who invented and patented fused deposition modeling, FDM. The famous garage story is that he was trying to make a toy frog for his daughter with a glue gun loaded with a mix of polyethylene and candle wax, and that gave him the idea of building objects layer by layer.
And the patent is real. It's U.S. patent 5,121, 329. Crump is the named inventor. That matters because FDM as a term is trademarked by Stratasys. When the rest of us say FFF, fused filament fabrication, that generic term exists precisely because FDM was theirs. Every cheap bed slinger you own is running the process this company patented.
Which is wild to sit with. The company says FDM became the bedrock of the whole business and gave it multi-decade dominance in accessible industrial 3D printing. How much of that do you buy?
The FDM as bedrock part, completely. Multi-decade dominance is where I'd push. They were a leader, absolutely, but 3D systems was right there the whole time with stereolithography. So it's more accurate to say Stratasys was one of 2 giants who defined the professional market for decades, not a lone king, and accessible industrial is a soft phrase. Their machines were never cheap. They were accessible compared to metal systems, not compared to what you and I print on.
Fair. Now, here's the modern bookend to the garage story. In 2026, they held a grand opening for a 200,000 square foot America's headquarters in Minnesota. And the coverage frames it 2 ways at once, as this callback to the scrappy startup roots and as, quote, a national security asset with bipartisan political support, showing up to cut the ribbon.
And that's the part I'd caveat. The facility opening looks real based on the trade coverage, but national security asset is a framing. It's the kind of language a company and its friendly politicians use at a ribbon cutting. I'd also ask the boring question, is a new HQ a sign of growth or a consolidation of operations they already had? A big building isn't automatically a big future. Sometimes it's just a nicer parking lot.
And the garage to global powerhouse narrative? Is that even still relevant for a 35-year-old public company?
Honestly, it's boilerplate at this point. Every mature company reaches for the founding myth when it needs a story. What's actually relevant is the patent legacy and the installed base. That's the inheritance that matters, not the frog.
So let's talk products, because this is where I think Stratasys gets genuinely interesting. They are not a one technology company anymore. My take. The thing that defines Stratasys today isn't FDM. It's that they own a whole portfolio of different processes, partly built in-house and partly bought. We're talking FDM, polyjet, stereolithography, P3DLP, and SAF powder bed fusion.
Right, and the acquisition story is half of that portfolio. Polyjet came in with the Objet merger back in 2012. That's the material jetting process that lets you print in multiple materials and full color in a single part, rubbery and rigid together. That's a genuinely distinctive capability, and it's why they own dental and medical models the way they do. We'll get to dental
and the Origin one. That came from acquiring Origin in 2020. That's their P3 DLP system, digital light processing, aimed at actual end-use parts, not just pretty prototypes. That's a signal, right? Buying a company whose whole pitch is production photopolymer parts.
It's a signal, yes. Origin's whole thing was programmable photopolymerization, tightly controlling the cure so you get repeatable mechanical parts, not just visual models. That's Stratasys buying its way toward the production story instead of only building it. And SAF, selective absorption fusion, their powder bed nylon process, is the in-house version of the same ambition, making functional polymer parts at some volume.
On the materials side, they've been pushing hard. Their materials page lists everything from high-performance thermoplastics to those multi-material full-color photopolymers to silicones. And recently, there's flame-retardant FDM material aimed specifically at rail, trains. Plus, what the trade coverage called in quotes, a massive material upgrade across FDM, Polyjet, and SLA.
Massive is marketing. New materials releases happen constantly. That's a normal cadence, not an event. What I'd actually credit is the direction. Flame retardant material for rail is a certification play. Trains have brutal fire, smoke, and toxicity standards. If you got a qualified material for interior rail parts, that's a real vertical door opening. That's more meaningful than any adjective they hang on it.
The company frames all this as serving the entire product lifecycle. Concept model, manufacturing aid, end-use part. Does owning 5 technologies make you strong, or does it just spread you thin?
That's the real question. And I genuinely go back and forth. On paper, breadth is a moat. A big customer can standardize on one vendor for everything. In practice, 5 processes means 5 R&D roadmaps, 5 service training programs, 5 materials, supply chains. That's a complexity burden, and that's I'd bet some of those platforms are stronger than others. Owning a technology and it being competitive are not the same thing. Some of these could be legacy lines quietly losing ground, while Polyjet and the production DLP get the love.
So the honest read is, the portfolio is genuinely broad. That breadth is real and unusual, but breadth is also a bet that they can afford to maintain all of it.
Well put. And that affordability question comes right back when we hit the financials.
Let's talk about who's actually steering this. The CEO is Yoav Zeif, and his background is unusual for this industry. Former McKinsey partner, executive at Netafim, which is a drip irrigation company. So he's a consultant and operations guy, not a printer nerd who came up through the machines.
And that's telling. You don't hire a McKinsey partner and an irrigation exec to invent your next nozzle. You hire that profile to restructure a business and drive a strategic pivot. His whole public posture, per the earnings calls and trade coverage, is steering the company away from the prototyping legacy toward industrialized production. He reportedly framed the Markforged acquisition as, quote, a bet on industrialization.
I'll flag that bet on industrialization is probably a paraphrase of his framing, not necessarily a verbatim quote. But it's consistent with everything he's said publicly. Around him, per the management team page, you've got a CFO, Eitan Zammer, and regional presidents for the Americas and for EMEA and APAC.
And the CFO role is the one to watch here because this is where the vision meets the math. The most recent quarter, Q1 2026, shows GAAP gross margins of 41.7% and a GAAP operating loss of $26.5 million. So the leadership team is trying to fund an expensive capital-heavy pivot into production while the P&L is bleeding. That's the actual job.
Some of the coverage described Zeif as keeping a tight grip on strategy. I'll say plainly, that's a characterization from a reporter or analyst, not a fact we can verify. We don't have a window into the boardroom.
Right, and I don't want to armchair psychoanalyze the guy. The verifiable thing is the pattern of decisions. Acquisitions pointed at production, materials pointed at qualified verticals, a big physical HQ investment. Whether a consultant and irrigation background is the right toolkit to navigate the cultural and technical weirdness of additive manufacturing, that's the open question, and it's genuinely open. Turnaround skills and printer domain instincts are not the same muscle.
And the fair version is, the strategy is coherent on paper. We just don't get to grade it until the numbers turn, or don't.
Exactly. Coherent is not the same as working. Ask me again in a year of earnings calls.
Okay, the moat. When people ask why Stratasys is still standing when there are faster, cheaper competitors everywhere, my instinct is, it's not the printers. It's everything around the printers. Materials, software, workflow, the installed base. Jordan, translate that. What's the actual lock-in?
The lock-in is that on a lot of Stratasys systems, you're running their materials on their software, and increasingly through their validated workflow. That's a closed ecosystem. It's the printer and ink model. The hardware is the entry ticket, and the recurring revenue is the consumables. Once a shop has qualified a part on a specific machine with a specific certified material, switching costs are brutal. Requalifying is expensive and slow. That inertia is the moat.
They also claim, on the materials page, the widest materials portfolio in the industry. That one I want you to poke at, because that phrase set off my radar.
Good radar. Widest in the industry is an unverifiable marketing claim. EOS, 3D Systems, HP, they all have deep material catalogs too. And widest can be a numbers game if you count every color and every minor variant as a separate material. Your list gets long fast without any of it being uniquely capable. I'd take widest as very broad, and we count it generously. Don't confuse breadth with unique performance.
On software, they've got GrabCAD Print, which is their print prep and management platform, and something called OpenAM, which is a more open materials and parameters play. So there's at least a gesture toward openness in a mostly closed ecosystem.
OpenAM is interesting because it's a partial answer to the closed ecosystem complaint. It lets more advanced users tune process parameters and use validated third-party materials on certain systems. That's them acknowledging that if you're too locked down, sophisticated industrial customers walk. So it's a controlled opening, open enough to keep the demanding customers, closed enough to keep the consumables revenue.
And the newest piece of the moat is workflow. They launched a post-processing partnership program. The press release names Post-Process Technologies as the first partner. The idea is validating that painful step between the print finishing and the actual usable part.
And post-processing is a real unglamorous pain point. Support removal, washing, curing, surface finishing in a production environment. That's often where your labor and your bottleneck actually live, not at the printer. So a validated post-processing path is genuinely useful. Now, is it lock-in or is it a service? Both. Honestly, it solves a real problem and it deepens the ecosystem. Those aren't mutually exclusive, and competitors are chasing the same workflow integration story. So I wouldn't call it a unique moat. I'd call it table stakes. They're playing well.
So the moat is durable, but it's not magic. It's the combination. Hardware plus materials plus software plus a huge installed base, all reinforcing each other.
That's the honest version. It's not one clever thing. It's 20 years of accumulated switching cost, which, by the way, is exactly what an insurgent competitor can't fake overnight. But it's also not the same as being technically ahead. It's being embedded.
Let's place them in the market. The way I read it, Stratasys sits on two pretty different pillars. One is industrial manufacturing. Aerospace, automotive, tooling. The other is dental, which is this weirdly specific vertical where they're genuinely strong. Different customers, different sales motions, same company.
And the dental pillar is the one people underestimate. Their DentaJet series, polyjet based, is a workhorse in dental labs. There's a case study on their site with Glidewell, which is a big lab using the J3 DentaJet to crank up productivity. That's a named customer doing repeatable high volume model work. That's real.
And this ties back to episode 2 when we dug into that dental additive manufacturing market projection, the $10 billion headline. You made the point that a lot of dental printing is actually printed models that you thermoform aligners over, not the aligner itself.
Right, and that's exactly the DentaJet's sweet spot, high throughput model printing. So Stratasys is writing a genuine success story in additive, but I'll push on one word. The brief calls it dominance in dental. We don't have market share numbers in front of us. I'd say strong leading presence, not dominance. Dominance is a claim you back with data, and we don't have that data.
On the industrial pillar, the proof points they wave around are big names. Airbus, the coverage says over 25,000 printed parts in 2025, and Toyota, as evidence of the shift into production tooling and end-use parts.
And here's where I get careful. 25,000 parts sounds huge until you ask parts of what? Cabin brackets, jigs, tooling. A single aircraft program can generate a lot of small, non-structural parts. And that number almost certainly comes from a company or partner announcement, not an independent audit. Airbus is a real impressive reference customer, but one marquee logo is a proof point, not proof of an industry-wide production shift. Don't let one Airbus stand in for the whole market.
The strategic logic of the two pillars is that it diversifies revenue away from just selling machines, which is a slow, lumpy business, toward consumables and services, which is recurring.
That's the theory, and it's the right theory. Every mature additive manufacturing company wants recurring consumables revenue instead of living quarter to quarter on capital equipment sales, but the tell is in the margins. If the consumables and services strategy were firing on all cylinders, you'd expect healthier gross margins. And 41.7% gap with an operating loss says the recurring revenue engine isn't yet carrying the company. It's a work in progress, not a finished machine.
Competitively, where do they sit? Because we've spent the last few episodes on Bamboo at the desktop, Divergent and EOS in metal, Formlabs and SLS.
Stratasys is not fighting Bamboo. Different universe, different price tier. They're a premium industrial vendor competing with 3D Systems, HP's multi-jet fusion, EOS in polymer powder bed, and increasingly the production photo, polymer, and metal players. Their reputation among practitioners is reliable, well-supported, expensive, and closed. You buy Stratasys when uptime and support and a known material qualification matter more than sticker price. That's a real and defensible position. It's just not a growth hacker's position.
Okay. The turning point we have to talk about, and that we've now covered from 3 different angles on this show, the Markforged acquisition. Give people the shape of it, and then let's get into what it actually means for the company.
In May 2026, Stratasys acquired Markforged from Nano Dimension for $42.5 million in cash. And listeners of episode 2 will remember we watched that number wobble. It came in around $42.4 million in the paperwork, and the brief has it at $42.5. Either way, it's the same story, cheap, because Nano Dimension had paid around $116 million for Markforged roughly a year earlier.
116 down to about 42 in 12 months. You called it back then. That's not depreciation, that's a write-off with a press release attached. And your read was that it wasn't that Nano broke Markforged, it's that the whole public additive manufacturing asset class got repriced underneath everyone.
That's still my read. Markforged's continuous carbon fiber composite tech didn't get 60+% worse in a year. The market's willingness to pay 2021 prices evaporated, and it connects to another thread we've followed, Nano Dimension exiting additive manufacturing basically entirely. So this is a forced seller meeting a bargain buyer, which is a fine deal for Stratasys and a rough one for Nano's shareholders. For
Stratasys, the strategic prize is that Markforged brings metal and composite printing. So a company that had zero real metal story suddenly has one, and it slots into the aerospace and defense narrative that the whole industry is chasing right now.
Right, and this is the piece I'd temper. Yes, Markforged gives them composite and metal, the Metal X style-bound metal process, and the carbon fiber machines, but we flagged in episode 1 and 2 that there was an orphaned metal binder jetting line carved out and left behind with Nano Dimension. So Stratasys did not buy all of Markforged's metal story. If you're a customer on that binder jetting platform, this deal did nothing for you.
And the integration limbo you warned about. The deal timing, closing, stretching toward the end of 2026, means a long period of we can't comment on the roadmap.
Which is genuinely hard on users. Markforged's Onyx ecosystem has a loyal base, and now those people are waiting to find out whose materials strategy wins, whose software survives, whether pricing gets harmonized upward, which, as we noted, Stratasys has a history of doing. My advice from episode 2 stands: stock spares. Get contractual protection if you're a service bureau quoting a year out. Don't panic, but don't expand recklessly into a platform mid-transition. The coverage sequenced the acquisition right before that Minnesota HQ grand opening and wrapped both in the national security and defense framing. Is that a real strategic story or a PR bow? It's a bit of both, and I keep those separate in my head. The defense pull toward domestic additive manufacturing is real. We've covered it all season. The Air Force microveins, Norsk titanium, divergence factory. So there's a genuine tailwind, but calling a $42 million tuck-in a company transforming national security grade turning point is editorializing. It's a smart, cheap acquisition into a hot vertical. Whether it changes Stratasys' trajectory or is a modest bolt on being narrated as destiny, that's exactly what we don't know yet.
So even calling it a bargain has two sides. Bargain implies value. It might just reflect how much trouble Markforged was in.
Exactly. A price can be low because you're a genius buyer or because the asset is struggling. Usually it's some of both. And integrating a company with different technology and a different culture is where a cheap acquisition quietly turns expensive. The purchase price is the easy part.
Which brings us to Future Watch. The big question, as I see it, can the industrial pivot generate enough growth to outrun the financial headwinds? What do we actually know versus what are we guessing?
Let's separate those cleanly. Confirmed and factual Q1 2026 gross margin of 41.7%, operating loss of $26.5 million, a lowered financial outlook per their own investor materials. The Markforged acquisition is confirmed. The push into metal and composites is confirmed by that deal. Those are facts, not vibes.
And on the softer side, there's a lot of talk about AI-driven manufacturing trends, which every company says that right now.
It's a buzzword until there's a product or a partnership attached. We saw the real version this season, AORNL doing AI real-time print correction, the Dendrite and America Makes qualification framework. When Stratasys names a specific AI capability that shortens qualification or improves yield, I'll care. Emphasizing AI trends in an earnings call is not a signal. It's noise everyone's making.
The concrete things to watch, then. What's your list for the next 12 to 18 months?
3 things. 1, revenue mix. Is the share moving from hardware toward consumables and services? That's the whole recurring revenue thesis, and it'll show in the segment breakdowns. 2, Markforged integration traction. Actual revenue synergy, not slideware, and whether they retain the Onyx customer base. 3, gross margin trajectory. If they can't get margins up while investing in the pivot, the math gets very hard because you can't fund a capital-intensive industrial transformation out of operating losses forever.
And the risk on the metal move, is it too late? EOS, the players we've covered, divergent with its 64 machine factory. That's a crowded, mature field for someone just arriving via a bargain acquisition.
That's the sharpest risk. Metal additive isn't a greenfield in 2026. It's a knife fight between established, well-funded specialists. Stratasys arrives with a composite and bound metal capability, not laser powder bed fusion at the scale Divergent or the aerospace players run. So they're not suddenly a metal leader. They've bought a foothold. Whether that foothold grows or just sits there depends entirely on execution and integration. The two things acquisitions most often fumble.
So the fair future watch framing isn't they'll win or they'll fail. It's here's an ambitious, capital-heavy pivot happening at the exact same time as very real financial execution risk. And the next several earnings calls will tell you which way it's tipping.
That's exactly it. And I'd resist the binary outrun the headwinds framing, honestly. It might not be win or die. It might just be a slow grind toward a smaller, more focused industrial Stratasys. That's a legitimate outcome too. Not glamorous, but survivable.
All right, let's land it. Why does Stratasys matter and who should be paying attention? My take, they matter because they're the company that invented the process most of us print with. And because they're a live test case for whether a legacy prototyping giant can genuinely reinvent itself as a production company. If you run industrial additive, or you're on a Markforged platform, or you're just trying to read where this whole industry is heading, you watch Stratasys.
And I'd add, watch them because they're the counterweight to all the fast, cheap, open disruption we cover. Stratasys is the embedded, closed, well-supported, expensive incumbent. Their story tells you whether accumulated switching costs and a deep installed base are enough to survive a market moving towards speed and openness. That's a bigger question than one company.
So what's the one open question you'd have listeners track?
Whether the pivot shows up in the margins. Everything else, the vision, the HQ, the Markforged logo, the Airbus number, is narrative. Gross margin moving up while they fund the transformation is the one hard signal that the industrial bet is actually paying off. If that number climbs over the next year, the story's real. If it doesn't, it's a very well-told story with a difficult balance sheet.
The margin is the tell. I love it. That's our profile of Stratasys. 35 years from a glue gun and a toy frog to a company trying to industrialize itself before the market reprices it. Go look at the machine you're printing on tonight and remember it exists because of a patent this company filed. We'll catch you next week on Layer Lines Weekly.